You did not imagine it. That feeling, the one that arrives when you watch the news or you listen to a politician speak, and something in you switches off. I know it does in me, not from a lack of interest, but from a deeper recognition about what is being said, because it has no genuine connection to the life that you are living. Now, I know that some of you will call that cynicism, but I want to challenge that immediately because what you're feeling is not the jadedness of someone who stopped caring. It's the accurate perception of someone who can see the gap and feel it too. That's the gap between the performance and the reality. And you've been seeing it long enough that it has become unbearable. What you are sensing has a precise explanation. And the political conversation, whether it's left or right or center, cannot provide it because the political conversation is part of the problem. And what I want to deliver today is something different. It's not an opinion, it's not commentary, it's a map. It's a precise psychological map of what is happening in our world today, in the rooms where decisions about your life and my life are being made. So by the end of this, I trust you will understand why this is happening with such consistency across every political system simultaneously, and why what you're feeling in response to it is not the problem. It's the most accurate thing in the room. I want to start with something. Every serious tradition that understood power also understood something our culture has almost entirely forgotten. You cannot lead people through territory you have never genuinely entered yourself. And I'm not talking about policy territory, and I'm not talking about legislative territory. I'm talking about the interior territory. So I want to be really precise here about what I mean because this matters a lot. Now, think about what happens when life removes the structure you've been standing on, not as an inconvenience, not a difficult year. It's the kind of removal that leaves you with no floor, no ground. It could be the business you've built for 12 years and it's collapsed in 6 months, or it might be the marriage that ended and took your entire sense of who you were with it, or the diagnosis that arrived on an ordinary Tuesday and then divided your life into a before and after, or the moment you realize the person you trusted most has been systematically lying to you. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know it not as a concept, but you know it as a lived reality. These are descents, not because they are painful, but because they strip away the version of yourself that was managing life from the surface. They force a confrontation with something much, much deeper, something that cannot be optimized or reframed or managed back into comfort. The traditions that understood leadership understood this. The person that has been through that stripping and has come back from it carries something real, something that cannot be performed. And you can feel it immediately when you're in their presence. But I want to name something here with real care because the argument becomes more precise at this point. Now, dissent, that is DESCENT, not DISSENT, dissent and integration are not the same thing. A person can go through genuine tragedy and real loss and real stripping, the kind that leaves no room for pretending, and they can come back from it more defended, but not more open and more armored rather than more humble, and using their wound as a credential rather than letting it be a teacher. Now, in my practice, I've sat with people like this. The suffering was genuine, the loss was real, but underneath the passion with which they described it, something was still managing, not genuinely holding. Yes, the descent happened, but the integration did not follow. And I've sat with people for whom this descent was genuinely metabolized. They came back genuinely changed, more open, more capable of holding complexity without collapsing it, but less certain of themselves and more reliable because of that. The difference between these two people is not what happened to them, it is what they did with what happened to them. Whether the experience genuinely rebuilt them at depth or whether they survived it by becoming harder, that distinction matters enormously for leadership. The unintegrated wound does not produce wisdom. It produces an uninitiated leader, not untested, but unintegrated. That person in a position of power carries something genuinely dangerous, and that is the certainty of someone who has suffered and believes that suffering entitles them. Now, this did not happen by accident because there was a time when the structures that produced leaders also tested them, when the path to genuine authority required something of the person traveling it, and when institutions of family and community and civic life at least put a certain weight on people before handing them power. Now, these structures, as I see it, have largely collapsed. Everything that replaced those structures rewarded one thing: performance, the management of perception, the appearance of competence, rather than the slower process of becoming adequate to real weight. The result is not one uninitiated leader. The system now produces them almost exclusively. The architecture that once produced genuine authority has been dismantled. Let me make this concrete because this is the part that changes how you see everything. Now, think about two kinds of people you've known in your life. The first kind has been seasoned by life. You can feel it when you're with them. Something has gravitas, has weight. They can hold difficulty. They're resilient without collapsing it into a slogan. They can hold complexity without rushing into certainty because they've sat inside genuine difficulty themselves. They failed at things that mattered. They've lost things that could not be replaced. And something in that process rebuilt them. And it rebuilt them at a level that can hold real weight. That's the first kind of person. Now, the second kind are people who've moved through life with sufficient protection from consequence that the genuine tests never fully landed. The ones who built their confidence on achievement, on approval, on the management of perception, rather than on the harder process of surviving their own failures with their humanity intact. Now, if we put the first kind in a position of genuine leadership, they can hold it. Something has been prepared in them for the weight of it. If we put the second kind there, you get the performance of leadership without the substance. You get the language of care without the depth, and you get the certainty of someone whose certainty has never been broken by anything real. That pattern has a name. James Hillman identified it with devastating precision: the Puer Pattern. That's P-U-E-R, eternus, meaning the eternal youth. And this isn't a judgment about age or gender. It's an observation about interiority. This is the person who has arrived at power without genuine initiation because life never genuinely tested them, or because when it did, they survived without being genuinely changed by it. I'm going to use the word puer, P-U-E-R, from here on. But understand, I mean the pattern. I want to emphasize this. I mean the pattern, not the gender. Once you can see it, you will see it everywhere. You will see it in the politician who speaks about the struggling family while legislating from a position so removed it might as well be a different species, or in the leader who invokes ordinary people as justification for decisions ordinary people never genuinely consulted on. You know these people. You have watched them govern. They arrive with their mandate, their program, and they speak with fluency about fairness, morality, the future, the ordinary person. But underneath the fluency, I see something is missing. You may see it too. You may even feel it, even without the language for it. There's an absence of weight, and there's a specific hollowness of a person playing the role of leader without having done the interior work that makes leadership real. The Puer does not lead. They manage. They perform. They administer with the confidence of someone whose certainty has never been broken by anything that costs them something real. And the ordinary person is tested repeatedly by the conditions of actual life, and they fill that gap immediately. Look, the body knows, and the body knows long before the mind has the language for it. So what I'm offering you today is the language, the framework that confirms what the body already knew. Now, something else is operating alongside all of this, and I think it may be more important to understand than the Puer pattern itself. You've probably experienced this. You've watched a political movement. It could be a cause or an institution or a party, and they become increasingly certain of their righteousness. As that certainty grows, something shifts. The people inside of it stopped being curious and started being corrective, started treating ordinary people's choices as problems requiring management. Their values are things needing adjustment, their way of life as territory requiring improvement, not through persuasion, through institutional power. And it's applied with complete confidence by people who genuinely believe they know better. Here's the thing I want you to hold. They genuinely believe they know better. That is not cynical manipulation in most cases. That is something far more dangerous in my mind. So here is the pattern underneath that experience. Every human being, every group, every movement carries darkness alongside its light. Selfishness alongside genuine care. Fear alongside genuine idealism, hunger for power alongside the genuine desire to serve. But when a group refuses to acknowledge that darkness in itself, the darkness does not disappear. It gets pushed outward and attributed to the people who disagree with increasing confidence and increasing force until the group grows entirely certain that its own darkness belongs to everyone else. Carl Jung called this collective inflation, and this is when a group becomes so certain of its own righteousness, it loses contact and connection with its shadow. And historically, every time this pattern has been given sufficient institutional power, who pays the price? The ordinary person pays the price. Because look, here is what collective inflation produces. It produces a structure that claims to protect you while systematically removing your capacity for genuine self-determination. That speaks endlessly about your well-being while making decisions about your life from a comfortable distance. That treats your resistance not as legitimate disagreement, but as evidence of your failure to understand. So the ordinary person who pushes back against this is not ignorant, and they're not selfish, and they are not on the wrong side of history. They're experiencing something very real. The specific wound of being treated as a problem to be solved as distinct from a person to be trusted. Now, I want to be completely clear about this because this pattern applies across the entire political spectrum, whether it's left, right, center, any movement, any ideology without exception. The pattern does not belong to one side. It belongs to the mechanism of unexamined certainty itself. Here's what makes this pattern so difficult to see from inside it. It wears the face of genuine facilitation, the consultation that has already decided, the listening exercise that was never going to change the outcome, the participation mechanism designed to produce the appearance of a democratic process while the decision moves forward regardless. So the ordinary person feels the gap between what they're being told is happening and what is actually happening. They feel it in the body before they can name it in the mind. That gap is real. It's very real. And it has a precise name. It's different from the Puer pattern. The uninitiated leader cannot hold the weight because genuine integration is precisely what they're missing. And what I'm describing here is something else, something more deliberate, something that deserves its own transmission. And in 2 weeks from now, that is exactly what I'm going to do. Here is the deepest wound as I see it. Genuine leadership is not primarily administrative. It's not policy and it's not legislation. Its deepest function is this: to hold the complexity of collective life with enough depth and enough genuine care that ordinary people feel seen, held, not managed, not processed through a consultation mechanism and then ignored. That function has almost entirely collapsed in contemporary governance. The performance of it has taken its place. The language of care without the substance, the structures of representation without the genuine presence of the people being represented. This has a name: the absent father, the absent mother, the authority figure who occupies the position without inhabiting the function. I sense you felt this. That specific quality of being spoken at rather than spoken with, or having your experience acknowledged in a speech and then ignored in a policy, or of being told that difficult decisions are being made on your behalf by people who will not be living inside the consequences of those decisions. That is not political failure in any ordinary sense. That is the failure of the authority function to make genuine contact with the people it claims to serve. Here is what that failure is removing from the ordinary person's life. It's not security, and it's not representation, and it's not the management of the institutional processes. It's meaning. The sense that the ordinary life lived with genuine care and genuine responsibility is part of something that exceeds individual survival. Think about what that means for a specific person. The truck driver does not need a better fuel subsidy to feel that their work matters. They need to feel that the community they serve is genuinely held by something that recognizes their contribution as contribution, not merely as economic activity. Or the retired teacher doesn't necessarily need a better pension calculation. They need to feel that what they gave, 30 years of genuine care for other people's children, was received by something larger than the budget they served. This is what genuine leadership has always provided, not through ideology or through rhetoric, but through the quality of its own genuine contact with something larger than its institutional interests. The person who has genuinely descended and genuinely integrated what life brought carries that contact. You can feel it in their presence. The ordinary person in their proximity feels their own life oriented in relation to something real, something that exceeds the merely transactional. The Puer, P-U-E-R, cannot provide this, not from a lack of desire, because meaning at that depth requires a register of intelligence the selection mechanisms of contemporary power most reliably suppress. And in its absence, the ordinary person lives inside what Viktor Frankl calls the existential vacuum, not suffering in any obvious sense and not in crisis, but getting up, doing the work, returning home, and still unable to answer the question sitting underneath all of it. That is not philosophical self-indulgence. That is the human question available. And the leaders who can hold a genuine answer to it are precisely the ones the current system cannot produce. When that failure persists long enough, something begins to happen in the ordinary person. Quietly, a withdrawal, a retreat into private life as the only space where genuine agency and genuine meaning still feels possible. That withdrawal is not apathy. I need to be clear about this because it's a rational response to institutional abandonment and to a meaning deficit that no policy has the capacity to address. So the ordinary person withdrawing their genuine participation from a system that has repeatedly demonstrated it is not genuinely interested in them. So let me come back to earth for a moment, because everything I've said so far is only useful if it connects to the person living it. That's you, not the analyst, not the commentator, but the person who gets up in the morning, goes to work, pays their taxes, raises their children, and may try to live with integrity inside systems that increasingly treat that integrity as an inconvenience. I think about a client I know who runs a small business. He has 3 employees, works very hard, pays his taxes without complaint, and he asks for nothing except to be left alone to build something of genuine value in his community. He doesn't follow politics closely. He's got no sophisticated political identity. But he said something recently I've not been able to stop thinking about. And he said this: it feels like we are being governed by people who have never had to live with the consequences of a bad decision. There was no framework, no archetypal language, just the direct perception of a client, of a man who has lived with the consequences of his decisions every single day of his working life. He can feel the uninitiated leader. He can feel the absent authority. He can feel the meaning deficit in the systems that are supposed to serve him. And he can feel the gap between the performance of care and the reality of his life. He simply has no framework that validates what he is sensing. And what he is sensing is very real. In my practice, I've spoken to hundreds of people, hundreds of ordinary people. And the people I've spoken to, they're not politically unsophisticated. They are archetypally perceptive. The body knows things about the quality of leadership that no political analysis can reach. The body knows it is being managed rather than led, when it is being claimed rather than being seen. And when the authority governing it carries genuine weight or is hollow underneath the performance. And right now, the body of ordinary people across this country and across most of the Western world, I would contend, is registering something clearly: hollow. So where does that leave us, and what is possible? I'm not going to offer a political solution, not because I don't care about the political, but because political solutions, while sometimes are necessary, only address the surface. What I've been examining with you lives much deeper than the surface. So here's what I want to give you instead. First, the validation. Your disillusionment is not cynicism, and your withdrawal is not apathy, and your perception of the gap between the performance of leadership and the reality of it has always been accurate. The framework to explain it has simply been missing from the conversation. And that matters more than it might seem, because the ordinary person has been consistently told that their disillusionment is a personal failing. It is not. It is accurate. It is an accurate perception in search of a match. Second, the understanding that genuine leadership, when it has existed, has always been recognizable by one quality, and that is the person carrying it had been somewhere, not geographically, but interiority. They had made the descent. They'd lost something that mattered and not been destroyed by the loss. They've met their own darkness and were not afraid of yours. And crucially, they let what happened to them genuinely change them. They did not survive it by becoming harder. They came through it by becoming more real. And they carried something else alongside that. This is a quality of genuine contact with something larger than their own institutional interests, which meant the ordinary person in their presence felt oriented, felt that their ordinary life was part of something that mattered, not through ideology, but through the genuine depth of the person holding the space. Here's what I want to say about what the quality of presence makes possible, because this is the piece most leaders I see have never fully understood. The fundamental goal of human development is not productivity. It's not achievement. And it's not even well-being in the way that word is currently used. It is becoming more fully yourself. Know thyself. Carl Jung named this journey with a single word: individuation. That is the progressive integration of all the parts of the self into a conscious whole. The movement from the fragmented, defended, socially managed version of a person toward the genuine, undivided human being. Individuation is not something any leader can mandate or organize. It is, by definition, an individual journey. Nobody can do it for you. No external authority can deliver it. But here is what a genuine leader can do. They can create the conditions in which that journey becomes possible. That is an environment where your agency is amplified rather than being managed, and where your genuine development is recognized rather than flattened into a function, and where the full human being you are in the process of becoming is held as the point, not your productivity, not your compliance, not your usefulness to the institutional agenda, your wholeness. The poor cannot hold that environment. And it's not because they are indifferent to human development. It's because the system that produced them runs on a different fuel entirely. Fragmentation serves the system. The person who keeps their shadow unconscious is more manageable. The human being who has never genuinely integrated what life brought is more predictable. And the person who has stopped asking what their life is for is less likely to disrupt the institutional agenda. The genuine leader knows this, not as a political observation, as a lived reality, because they've done the work themselves and they know what becomes possible in a human being who is moving towards wholeness. The ordinary person in the presence of that kind of leadership does not feel administered. They feel something rarer. They feel that their becoming is being held. They feel that person is not produced by selection processes that reward performance. They are produced by life, by the willingness to go down when life demands it and trust that the return is worth it. And here's what I know from 30 years of this work. These people exist. They've always existed. They tend not to be found in positions of institutional power. I would suggest they're in your community. They're running a small business with genuine care for the people in it, teaching, parenting, building something of local value with no expectation of recognition. These are the people carrying the genuine leadership function in communities abandoned by the institutional version of it. Third, and this is what I want most to leave you with, the most genuinely political act available to the ordinary person right now is not the vote. Yes, the vote matters. It cannot reach the level where the actual problem lives. The most genuinely political act is this, and that is the refusal to remain unconscious in a system that requires your unconsciousness to function. The person who's done their own descent work, who has met their own darkness, who carries a specific clarity, who can distinguish genuine care from performance. The uninitiated system cannot govern them from the inside, not through resistance, through depth, through the clarity of someone who stopped outsourcing their own interiority to structures that do not have any. That is not political disengagement. That is the most genuinely political act available. And it begins not in the polling station, it begins in the territory that this channel is mapping. And part of that territory is the question of where genuine meaning now lives, when the outer structures that once provided it have largely collapsed, and the ordinary person is left holding a question nobody in power is equipped to answer. And the question is where the next season of this work begins. Before you go, 2 questions, neither of them comfortable. Where in your own life are you governing yourself? Is it from performance rather than depth? Is it from the certainty of someone whose certainty has never been broken open? Or is it from a wound that you've carried but not yet integrated? The second question, what is your extraordinary life actually for? Not what you produce, not what you manage, and not what you achieve. What is it for? These questions are not philosophical self-indulgence. I see it as the most urgent questions available right now. And it's these kinds of questions and diagnosis that this channel is mapping its way toward. I'm going to deliver 2 transmissions every week, Monday and Friday. I don't see this as going to be a content channel. It's a cumulative body of work. So each transmission will build on the last. The map will get more precise the longer you stay with it. Please go ahead and subscribe. And not for the algorithm, because the next transmission goes deeper and the one after that deeper still.